Welcome everybody to week 4, defeating trauma, spirit, soul, and body. So we've been talking about week 1 and 2. We talked about trauma and how trauma impacts the body, how it impacts the different parts of the brain that trauma impacts. And so we just talked about the different parts of the brain and the body that trauma impacts. That was week 1 and 2. Week 3 and this week 4, but last week we talked about the soul and we talked about triggers and how triggers work and how it all works. And we also talked about some of the different parts, the different assignments of triggers and of trauma. And we've defined trauma. And then this week we are going to do a review. We're not going to add necessarily much information, but we're going to do a review. And but we are going to, the only thing that we are going to add is we're going to add some intervention. So I'm going to talk about tapping. So we'll talk about tapping and what it is and why it's, how it works, why tapping is effective. And so, and we'll do a demonstration too. So I guess one of you here can, whoever wants to volunteer, we'll do a demonstration. So we'll, okay, so that's what we're going to do tonight. But before we do that, so we're going to go over some of the, so we have some questions. Now, before we even do the questions, so we have some things that, review questions that Sally and also Tammy helped with. So before we do that, though, I also want to give you guys an opportunity if you have questions, right? If there's questions about the questions or just things or even just things that have been highlighted. So the highlighted, when we do this helps of the material that we've addressed. If there's anything that has come up that you've been like, oh, this has been a takeaway, that helps us to review, and it helps others who maybe heard it from another perspective or maybe didn't catch that. It helps them to capture something that maybe they didn't capture. So if there's something that that you remember from any weeks 1, 2, or 3, or also anything that, no, we'll stick with the review right now for now. Okay, so we'll start with that before we do the presentation. So is there anything that anyone would like to highlight or a question? Hey, Katie and Lori and Gabby.
Hello, hello.
Jessica. Okay.
I have a question.
Julie.
Yes. And I apologize, I didn't stop you when you were teaching it. So it was in session 2, and we were talking about the 4th part of the brain, the eternal brain, the mind of Christ, and that he calls us to process like him, see like him, and respond like him. And then you said he has given us his mind to process things, to see from his perspective, just using our lower reasoning brain causes. And then I have a question mark because I missed it.
So Julie, you're asking week 2, when we're talking about the different minds, and I made a reference to if we only rely, because we have, so, and actually it's different minds. So we have, there's brains, right? There's 3 levels of brains. We talked about last time, the different parts of the brain, right? We have the instinctual brain. That's the lower part. That's the part of it that's similar to the animal brain. And that's the instinctive part of us. That's the part that, that's the autonomic nervous system. That's the part we don't have to think about, right? We don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think. Then we have the mammalian brain. That's the mammal. That's the limbic system. That's where the emotional center is, okay? And then we have the 3rd part of the brain, and that's the prefrontal cortex. And that's the front part of the brain. Okay. And that's where the reasoning is. That's where planning, that's where our like executive function, the front part of our brain, right? The animals don't have that part of the brain, right? So that front part of the brain is the part of our human brain that does reasoning and all that. Okay. Now, that's considered the higher brain. Now, then I said that then we have a fourth part. Now, we could either say, I think probably it better because then we have two minds, right? So there's the brain and then there's the mind. Okay, right? The brain and the mind are not the exact same thing, right? Joy's like, no, like, duh. She's like, duh, no, it's not. And she's right. But yeah, good answer. But no, the reason why, so the brain is the biology part of our brain, right? It's the physical part, the structural part of our brain. But the mind is the part that you can't see, right? And so that's so our mind, we have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. And the conscious mind, right, is the mind, and actually the conscious mind, the conscious part of us, and this part's important also for trauma and for understanding it, because it really does, the conscious part of our mind is the part that we're fully aware of. That's the part that we're really aware of. And actually that only controls about 3% of our decisions. The subconscious mind, that we're not aware of, that's those memories, those thoughts, the things that we're not aware of, controls over they say about 97% of our decisions. So when people say, a lot of times people will say to me, oh, well, I know that, no, that happened when I was 3, I don't even think about that anymore. Well, guess what? It's actually the stuff that we think we don't think about anymore that actually is having the most impact. Because remember why this is, our belief systems are developed from 0 to like 7, 8, right? That's when our belief systems are being developed. As children. And so we usually then go through life responding, reacting from those belief systems that were developed, because that's when our brain waves are slowed down. That's why that's the best time to learn. That's the best time, right? Languages, I say, teach kids languages early. The brain is very plastic. It's called neuroplasticity. And so at that age and through like even 25, our brain is still plastic, but it's the most at that time. So that's the best time to learn. And so that's when our belief systems, we believe everything that we hear, what we see. It's like, yes, kids are like, oh my gosh, yes, I can fly. I want to be a fireman. Yes, I want to be an astronaut. Until somebody says, you can't. So, right. So that's why I believe that's why Jesus says, have the heart of a child in order to enter the kingdom, right? Because we children believe, Jesus says, hey, just believe. The child says, okay. And they do. So, but then the mind, so then what I said, go back to Julie's question, or continuing on her question about the other part. So then the higher science recognizes that it's 2 minds. And what I said is, no, we actually have 3 minds, because again, scripture tells us that let this mind, in Corinthians, let this mind be in you, the mind of Christ's mind, that's Christ. And so he says, come and reason with me. That means we spend time with him and interact with him, right? Then we can reason with him. Now, so that's the third mind. And what I said was, if we stay just and we live only from the survival part of our brain. That's the lower part. That's the animal part. We need that part too. But if we just live from there, we will be depressed and frustrated because we were not designed to only live from that part. We were designed to live. That's the part that only focuses on survival. Okay, so and so there is a lot of that, right? There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of depression and anxiety living from, which those are some symptoms and responses to events that have happened in life. So,
Okay.
so that is.
So clearly I'm missing either part of my brain or part of my mind, because my question then is, we have three parts of the brain. You said the instinctual, the mammal, and the prefrontal cortex. And then we have three parts of mind: conscious, subconscious, and the third mind is the mind of Christ. Is the lower brain the instinctual and the mammalian, or just the instinctual?
It's just the instinctual. The mammalian is the middle part. So there's the lower, that's the animal brain, right?
Okay.
That's the instinctual. And then the mammal, when we say mammalian, the mammal part is that's the emotional center. That's where the limbic system.
Okay.
That's the emotional part. And then the prefrontal cortex.
I got it now. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for asking, because I'm sure somebody else was thinking that as well. Okay.
How do you spell mammal?
Oh, mammal, M-A-M-M-A-L.
Oh,
Mhm.
mammal.
Mammal, right.
Oh, I-A-M.
Mammal, because that's just the the mammal or mammalian brain. Okay.
Real quick, the lower is the animal, the middle is the mammal.
Mm-hmm. The limbic system in the mammal. Mm-hmm. So there's the instinct, the emotional, and the reasoning. Right, those are the three parts. It is the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, that's the same thing.
No. The mammal is the lower, right? So I'm sorry. The mammal is the middle. The instinct is the lower.
Instinct is lower, is
Right.
animal.
Yeah, that's like the brainstem area. Okay. That's the instinct, right? That's the stuff that we do without thinking about it.
I have a question based on that, Lisa. So would you say mind is associated, or our minds are associated with our spirits or our soul?
Our mind.
Yeah.
Our mind would be our soul, but it's connected.
Right.
Also with our spirit. So
because technically Christ's mind is the Holy Spirit, right? So then that's obviously connected to our spirit. So Christ's mind would be the Holy Spirit. So that's connected to our spirit, right?
Right. It's connected with it's in our spirit. So we all have a human spirit too. But we won't go into all that.
Sorry, don't mean to go on a tangent.
But we do have a human spirit, we have a soul, and we have a body. And then there's Holy Spirit. Okay. Good. What other questions?
The 0 to 7 on our belief system.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't worry about that. I'll just repeat them. Oh yeah.
Those are subconscious. Do they always stay there because they
change? Okay, good. Scott asked did you guys hear what Scott said online? Okay, so Scott just asked the belief systems that were developed from 0 to 7, right? When our belief systems that we develop as kids, can they be changed? Can they change? And yes, yes, they can change. That's called, so it's programming, right? And this is why we're here actually, because trauma is basically when trauma happens, we said it's a response, right? It's our response. It's not necessarily what happened to us, but it's our response. It's either our body response, our mind response, our thoughts. It's a response to what our emotional response to what happened, right? And so what a situation will happen. So say an experience happens. I was giving you guys the example last week about a student of mine who, this was when I was at the school, and this was over 10 years ago. And I didn't tell you guys what happened from that. But anyway, she had been traumatized because her mother left, and not just her mother, she'd had other women come in and out of her life. And so I was her therapist, and this was in a therapeutic school. So when I would go as a therapist, I would meet with each of the students in our classroom individually and in group. But when I would go get her, because that was a threat to her, because here I'm a woman. Remember, we talked about the way the brain pairs. So when the trauma has happened, it will pair, and because it works by association, because the goal of the amygdala is to protect us. It's survival. So it's like, you got to stay alive, survival. So what it does is it stores things in the memories from things that happened before that were painful, because it created a meaning. And so it does that to protect us. So for her, because she had a pattern of being hurt by women, her brain had stored in her that I was a threat, right? That women are a threat, because they're gonna leave. They're gonna leave. And that's a subconscious thing, right? So, but also she was aware. So when I would go and say, hey, come, let's go talk, she felt threatened, and so she'd immediately go off and start yelling, calling me names. I'm not come talk to you, get out of my face. So now that was her response, because she was trying to protect her as a part of her brain that was telling her, you're in danger, 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 danger. Watch out, you're in danger. So do you think that was easy for me? It wasn't easy for her first, but I knew also, even though I knew, right, consciously, that like, okay, this is a trauma response. She's, it still was like, that still felt like rejection, right? Felt like, ooh, yeah, but still. Now, we said that one of the most effective interventions that helps with trauma response is exposure, right? One of them is exposure. We'll talk about that too, some more with the tapping. But so each time when I would go to get her, because I didn't stop, just because she would have that reaction, I didn't stop, right? Because that's what she was testing, right? That's what her brain was testing. Well, is she gonna just, can I push her away too? Can I just push her away? Because in the past that works, right? Usually, if people pushing and rejecting, eventually you're like, okay, I'm not going there. So I just kept coming. Now each time when I keep coming, that was exposure to her. She was being exposed, and I was coming, and I wasn't reacting the way she would expect me to react. I wasn't getting mad. She wasn't even seeing an external, even though internally there was some response, but she wasn't seeing that on the outside. So she was just seeing me continue to be consistent, to calm and to say, it's okay. No, and we'd have to talk. We talk about it. So eventually though, what do you think happened? Because now when I'm doing that, I'm also, because we're rewiring. So trauma, so Scott asked, can it change? Yes, the brain can be rewired, right? And rewiring by pairing. So trauma is when, so before the woman or women were paired with leaving and abandonment. And so these two things were paired in her brain. Now what I'm doing when I'm keep going and building relationship, I'm helping her to rewire and say, okay, now here's another situation of the same person, the same type of person who would normally have been a threat, but I'm not a threat. I'm helping her to rewire. I'm giving her brain another message. Nope, I'm not going anywhere. Nope, I'm coming. Yeah, I still want to have, I'm not mad at you. I'm not judging you, but no, we do have to talk because I do expect you to be respectful. I expect you to be able to express yourself in a way that is, in a way that's respectful, but it's okay that you're angry. I understand, right? So that's what I'm continuing doing it. Eventually, after so long, this is each day in, day out, then eventually, guess what happened? Eventually, she broke down. I was no longer a threat. And as a matter of fact, then every time I come into class, oh, can I come here? I want to come. I want to come. Go ahead. I want to come. And we're still in touch today.
Aww.
So that's rewiring. And yes, it can change. And so it can be rewired. And so when we rewire, reprogram, and there's specific ways to do that, to rewire, reprogram that. But it has to go, impact has to get to our subconscious. So the interventions have to be subconscious level. And the tapping is one that does that. So we'll talk about that. So
I have a question.
answer your question, Scott? Good question.
I have a question.
Yes, Joy, and then, oh, I'm sorry, Jen, I've seen Jenny's hand up, and then Joy.
Hello, you hear me? So my question is when you have trauma as an adult after the age of 7, like some of the instances I've had were as an adult, am I understanding it that those events or issues or situations are all defined by how I was when I was younger?
I'm not hearing. No, it's bouncing.
Can you hear me now?
I heard she said something about.
No.
Yeah, but it's
Can you hear me, Lisa? Can you hear me,
echoing.
Lisa?
Yeah, who's
Lisa?
that?
Oh, this is Julie, and I heard her
Yeah.
question. Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, Julie
okay.
isn't doing that.
Okay, so Jenny said that she wants to understand if she has trauma now as an adult, it is impacted by how she was when she was 7.
Yeah, so like a lot of my issues that I've realized I've gone back and looked at trauma in my life have happened as an adult. And I am trying to understand, you said that trauma is based on when we're a child. So when I have issues as an adult, that's still coming from when I'm a child and my belief system, or is there some more belief systems that grow as an adult?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, well, let me clarify something, okay, Jenny. I think, Jenny, what you're saying, you're if trauma is you're saying trauma is from our childhood, right? You're thinking, I think you're.
She's asking, she said a lot of her trauma has happened when she's been an adult. So is it
Right.
Is the impact of that trauma from her belief systems that were formed by the time she was 7, or are there additional belief systems that impact the trauma that she has as an adult?
Yeah.
Is what
good.
I'm
So
understanding.
that's a good question. Thank you, Julie. So first, it's not just, so obviously there's people get traumatized at any time in life, right? Because basically trauma is a response. So we can experience a response to things that happen even as an adult. And it's not necessarily, and that can also just add on to something from childhood, or it can be a new thing. So it's not necessarily always just belief systems from childhood, although we do develop our belief systems from childhood. Does that make sense, Jenny? So we develop our belief systems in childhood, but that doesn't mean that all of our responses are just going to be responses. So like you've had many traumas, you said, from in adulthood. That can also rewire belief systems and add some things right on top of what we had as children. Okay, so
Okay.
so yeah.
For me, it's like a lot of my trauma feels it happens after I was an adult. So when we did the childhood ACEs test, I didn't have a lot of that as affecting my belief system. So I'm just trying to think about, like, a lot of it happened after I was an adult. So that's still okay.
And it's still, and the ACEs was more, again, the ACEs were childhood. That's a childhood assessment, but it's not necessarily. So last week we took the ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences survey, and you guys kind of did that. And then we looked at if you had 4 or more, 6 or more, if you had above 4, really 4 was kind of a marker for more severe impact that it can have even years down the line on health if we don't resolve and address some of those things, right? And so that's what Jenny is talking about. So we did take the ACEs, but even so that just mainly was focused on childhood experiences. Joy, and then good. Joy, you had a question too, and then
Yeah. Last week you said a statement, and I just wanted you to kind of elaborate, because I had something before and after it, but you said suffering helps our soul to work out any unresolved issues.
Well, not any unresolved issues. Yeah. So what I was talking about, so I mentioned last week, I mentioned about suffering. Even as we're talking about all of this with trauma, we're talking about, right, the function of trauma. Like we kind of debunked some of the myths that trauma is not supposed to happen ever, and that trauma doesn't happen to Christians, and that Jesus never experienced trauma, right? Some of those things that sometimes when people experience trauma, sometimes they feel ashamed, or they feel like, oh, I must be doing something wrong if I'm experiencing these things, or feel punished. And so we definitely wanted to debunk some of that, because it's just not true. Now, obviously, on this side of heaven, because we're living on the fallen side, we can experience trauma because of our own mistakes, because of others' sin, and because of where we live, but also just because it's something that will help us. Suffering can help us to understand, actually, even the nature of God more, in our own nature, right? And so So what I was saying in that comment was that suffering, which is a part of this life. Suffering is a natural part of this life. It's one thing that it's talked about in the Bible, right? Suffering is happens, right? It's going to happen. And the function of suffering, it actually, if our response to it is not, oh, why me? Why me? If it's not, if we don't go into victim and get stuck there, we don't get stuck there, then our response to it actually can be, and we talked about it, can be overcome. It can be empowering, because when we walk through that, when we walk through the suffering, oftentimes there's a calling in there. There's something that we've been called through some of that suffering. And from that, often what we conquer, we've been called to help others conquer times, right? So that's one. So it can be very empowering, helping us to overcome. If we then also it helps us when we go through that, especially when we do it in community. We were designed to have community and live in community. So when we go through that and we partner with others, then also it helps us to receive and to experience compassion, which is a part of God's nature and character. And it helps us also to learn more who we are and who God is, and see his nature. I know for me, when I've gone through suffering, any of the suffering that I've gone through, as painful as it was, and as it can be, to feel, wilderness, when I was, just times when I felt like alone, but I knew, but that's when I was so aware and more of God's presence, and of the fact that of his nature, and that he is always there, even when it didn't feel like people were around, even when people are, right? It didn't. So I think, and actually even the word for wilderness, the Hebrew word is midbar, which is where God speaks. And it's not that God is not always speaking, but sometimes we're not available to hear. We're more available to hear sometimes when we're going through suffering. Right. Okay. Does that answer your question, Joy?
So are we working out unresolved issues through the suffering
Yes.
then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I believe that we are our soul. So that's the sanctification process, right? Our soul is being sanctified while we're here. And so I do believe that we are working out. There is one of the things that we talked about really briefly was reenacting, like how our bodies and soul will reenact things in our lives until we talked about last week. I said it's kind of like a recurring dream, right? And we have a recurring dream. And how many have had a recurring dream? Just raise your hand if you've had a recurring dream. And a lot of times with recurring dreams, this is just what I've noticed. And then I believe this is with recurring dreams, it'll keep happening until the dreamer gets the message that we are to get, until we understand what the message is. And we go, okay. And then usually once we understand what the message is, and we go, oh, okay. And we get the message, whether either it's from God or it's our soul communicating something to us. When we get that, then the recurring dream stops. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing maybe in life, like that our soul will, because it's like a message until we're working out something. And until we get that thing, how many have had not just a recurring dream, but recurring events in life? It's like, why does this keep happening? This happened there. This happened. This happened. And then, well, we get, so the way I describe it, I say, you know, God is so kind that he doesn't flunk us, he gives us retakes. He lets us have retakes. But it's not even him. I don't believe it's him causing the things happen. I think it's again, the way our universe is. It's just the way it, but he put those principles in place. So it's opportunities for us to learn, opportunities to forgive, to receive forgiveness, to forgive others, and we get the continual opportunity. And so, yes, I believe that, and as we resolve it, as it's resolved, then we can go on to the next class. Life is a series of classes. And so I often will say, I'll ask them, okay, what class is this? What class am I taking here? Ooh, this is a tough one. Right. Like, ooh, this is a tough class, man. Ooh.
I'd rather pass on this one. Rather skip.
Yeah.
Skip class.
Can I withdraw? But yeah, but I believe because we're here for eternity, we're not here just for this, you know, short. We're not here for this temporal. This 2 Corinthians 4 talks about this is, you know, don't focus on what you can see because it's temporal. Focus instead on what you can't see because that's eternal. And so the things that this earth and our lives here, they're short and temporal, but we're preparing really for eternity. So, and the more that we know that, I believe that the less suffering is, even when things, because we're not so attached to everything that happens here in this realm. The more we are to our body and to this, what we can see and feel, until we're like, it's harder. I think that's suffering.
Thank you.
Suffering.
Thank you.
Suffering, holding on and refusing to let go. That's what I call suffering. Yeah, refusing to let go of what we're being invited to let go of that causes suffering. Let's see. Somebody else had their, was it Brooke? Did you have your hand up? Was it Brooke or Jenny? No, okay.
I guess I was just gonna say, I'm thinking about adult trauma too. And because a lot of my trauma has been as an adult. And so if trauma is based in how I respond to what happens to me as an adult, and my responses are largely formed in childhood, then it still is our childhood beliefs that are impacting whether or not what we experience as an adult is indeed traumatic to us. You know, so there's still, it seems like, for me anyway, it seems like there's still a connection, whether,
there's definitely a connection, I believe, but I just don't want to blanket it as in, because I do think, you know, obviously there's things that can happen that are just really hard, right? And adult, and it's not because of a faulty belief system why it's hard. So that's the only distinction I was making. But
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That helps me. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I needed to hear that.
Remember,
again.
guys, there is no condemnation. So I just, you know, in all of this, we're not. I want to remind that, and that actually condemnation is I would say one of the biggest things. So let me explain this. So an experience happens, right? And the experience can be the thing. So experience, in this student's case, she was felt abandoned by her mom. Then we interpret that. Okay, so the experience leads to an interpretation. And the interpretation And that's like the explanation. And that's why it's so important for kids to have a person, or an adult, a parent, who can explain. If we have someone explaining well, doing a good job of explaining things that happen, that can actually curtail and even prevent a lot of trauma, because it's our understanding. So when we the experience happens, and then our understanding or interpretation of it. Now that can be when the experience happens, that's an opportunity for a lie to be formed. Okay, so the experience and then the interpretation, which can be a lie, right? So the lie that the young lady, that example that I gave was, my mom abandoned me, so all women will. She also had a lie that I must not be worthy. There must be something wrong with me. Right. So these are when these experiences happen that we don't understand, we can't explain them. Like, why? I don't get this. I can't explain it. Then that's a vulnerability, and there's an opportunity, especially as a kid, for lies to come in. And then our belief system then to be built on a lie. And then from there, go through life building that lie. And then that lie can create, because remember, we don't, so in life, we attract more of what we believe, right? So then if we have this lie, well, and again, it's not, we talked about, it's not about fault. It's just kind of about, because our brain goes looking for more of what we already believe. So then we have the lie. Now the lie then connects with the wound, right? So then there's a wound there, and that's a memory. And that memory, there's meaning there. And so once we have meaning, then it's like, okay, we got to keep this here stored, and we have to remember this because there's meaning here.